We have a lot to do in 90 minutes, so I want to go ahead and get us started. My name is Michelle Lanier. I direct the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. It's based at the State Department of Cultural Resources. Our mission is to preserve, promote, protect North Carolina's African American history, arts, and culture for all people. So I'm sure you can imagine the Rosenwald story is really important to us. And I'm also a trained folklorist and oral historian. I went to Spelman College and then to UNC Chapel Hill. I hail from South Carolina, and my ancestry is in North Carolina, with some branches in Maryland and Mississippi. I learned the value of the power of narrative at my grandmother's kitchen table, Anne Grace, and on the banks of Defusky Island in Beaufort County, South Carolina, where I heard Emory Campbell, who used to be the director of the Penn Center, talk about the family across the sea. And that's where I felt my calling to be a folklorist, although at the age of 9 I didn't know what a folklorist was. It wasn't until I went to college that I started to understand the rich tradition of Hampton Institute, of people like Anna Julia Cooper, people like Zora Neale Hurston. Documenting community is something that I see to be sacred work, and oral history is my primary tool to do that. I'm an adjunct professor at Duke University, the Center for Documentary Studies, and I've been teaching there for 15 years. I love talking with people about oral history. If you've ever heard the old joke that if you want to find a solution to if you want to get an answer to a problem and the answer has to do with your teeth, then ask a dentist. If you want the solution to be oral history, ask an oral historian. I think oral history is actually a solution for any problem you throw at me, from advocacy issues, activism issues, preservation issues, even, unfortunately, the issues that are happening in Charleston right now and all over our country around racial unrest. I have seen oral history do the healing work of bridging communities. Because when people lean in to listen, to hear and be heard, to see and be seen, people are transformed. Every story that I have ever heard has changed me. Some of the first professional oral history work that I've done has been at the Department of Cultural Resources and State Historic Sites with men and women of a historically African American community in East Spencer. The town is near Salisbury, where we have a historically black college and university called Livingstone. And I had a chance to hear how that community grew based on the railroads coming through that town. And some of the challenges they faced, but the pride that many of them had, that several of the founding fathers were able to move out of the oppression of sharecropping and into the work of being railroad men. And I would say one of the proudest oral history projects that I can hold up, the project that I'm most proud of, is the work that I did with the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. Some of you had a chance to visit there in Sedalia, North Carolina, where historic Palmer Memorial Institute was. And we commemorate that story through the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. This was a black woman at the age of 19 who started an institution that became relevant internationally. People like Haile Selassie from Ethiopia, the emperor, sent his nephew to be educated there. People of color sent their children from all over the diaspora, the Central America, Cuba, all over the U.S., Oregon, California. If you know Nat King Cole, his wife, Maria Cole, was educated there and was related to Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown. And in the later years of its existence, he did perform fundraising performances there. The likes of W.E.B. Du Bois, Josephine Baker, Langston Hughes would drop by to interact with the students. Eleanor Roosevelt slept in Dr. Brown's home, Canary Cottage. She was a benefactor and supporter of what they were doing at Palmer. And if you know the tension between W.E.B. Du Bois, who had a very strong focus on black intellectual engagement, and Booker T. Washington, who was known for a more vocational focus on African American uplift, Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown is the bridge between those two pillars, because she had her students working on a farm to sustain the school, and those same students were learning Latin and Greek and had chemistry labs when most white students in North Carolina did not have access to chemistry labs. And those same young ladies who were learning these skills would sometimes sew their own dresses for balls in which they were taught to waltz and dance the Grand March. They also competed internationally in history bowls. They competed in England with a history bowl. So these are African American students. And the way I got involved with doing an oral history project is back to my grandmother's table. My grandmother used the power of story to stand us up straight, to impart dignity and identity. And it was a kind of inoculation against some of the degradation that was a part of growing up in the South as a black child. She understood that outside of the oasis space of her home, her kitchen, and the black community that we grew up in, that we may face moments that would inspire shame. And so she was constantly pouring over us, baptizing us with pride through story. And she told us that we had 4 relatives that attended Palmer Memorial Institute. And she told us how they came to be at this black boarding school, and how Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown started that school, and how we still knew people in our community who had gone to that school. I had the chance to be presented in a cotillion that was historically black and that was founded by 2 Palmerites, a man and a woman who went there. And just like Dr. Brown taught them to do the Grand March, this very, elegant and formal dance, we were taught to do the Grand March. And so you can see how I've been touched by Dr. Brown. So when I came to North Carolina and began my professional work as an oral historian, working with Duke University, well, you can't know me for more than 5 minutes without hearing me talk about my people. It's one of the I think outcomes of being born in the South. That's about the second question we ask someone. Who are your people, right? Black, white, Indian, mixed race, immigrant. We ask, who are your people? That's how we connect. And so that's how I introduce myself, is through my people. And so my colleagues at Duke understood that I had a connection to Palmer. And they had come into the possession of some photographs by a photographer named Griffith Davis, an African-American photographer who worked for the Foreign Service. He was a photojournalist. He wanted to do a photo essay in 1947 that would help dispel some of the stereotypes around African Americans. If you can think about Amos and Andy is in popular culture in 1947. There's still the legacies of minstrel shows. We still see, people having in their homes these Aunt Jemima and Uncle Tom figurines, which some people still collect to this day, that really present these caricatures and a very flat and often erroneous image of African Americans. So Griffith Davis wanted to challenge that and do a whole photographic series on Palmer Memorial Institute. He wanted to say this is a different kind of way that African Americans are living and conducting themselves through an educational experience. And so that was published in Life magazine and Ebony. And those photographs became the property of Duke University's library. And the Center for Documentary Studies wanted to travel an exhibit of these photographs. But they understood that the photographs would become more vibrant, more dynamic, more alive if there were stories to go with them. Well, my colleagues at Duke knew I had a personal connection to Palmer, and they knew that I was a trained oral historian, and so they asked me to conduct those interviews. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. One of the things that happened to me, and I'm sharing this with you, I'm giving you narrative so that you can understand how oral history can be useful. I've already told you that oral history helped to give me dignity growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, where sometimes as a young African American girl, I was not always encouraged because of the racial dynamics of the land I grew up in. So you heard how my grandmother used it. And now I'm telling you how Duke University used it one way. I had a chance to talk to these Palmerites, people who graduated from Palmer, from different eras. I talked to the only third generation Palmerite who graduated right around the time of the close in the 60s. I talked to a legislator, Mickey Mashaw, who's a Palmerite, who was considered head boy at one time. I talked to a couple who met there. And I talked to a woman named Margaret Kennedy Goodwin, who is no longer alive, but her father at one point was president of an African American bank that's here in Durham. He was a part of the Black Wall Street movement. He was also affiliated with the Kennedy, Merrick, Moore, Spalding families were all a part of the growth of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, the largest African-American owned insurance company in the world, right? So here she is in the 30s, child of this black leader, this man who's helping to build black wealth in Durham. And Margaret went to Palmer on scholarship. That was really important for me to hear that story, because what she did for me is she started to complicate what I understood about the black elite, about the black bourgeois. What she helped me to understand is just because there was status and access and privilege did not mean there was always money in mama and daddy's bank account. So this is during the Great Depression. Her father had status and access but did not have enough money to pay for tuition. So she went on scholarship. She worked in the farm. And she told me she loved it. She didn't see it as shameful at all. She said she loved getting her bare feet in the soil. She loved picking the sweet potatoes out of the soil. And then she loved getting cleaned up and sewing her dress for a dance. She helped me to understand that some of these stereotypes that we had of the quote-unquote talented 10th were also erroneous. I interviewed another woman who went through Palmer, and her father was a doctor. She too had to go on scholarship because her father served a very poor community. And that community always could not pay in money. They often would pay in, a suckling pig, a barrel of molasses, a basket, of berries, whatever they had. And so he didn't always have money to pay for tuition either. So this helped me to understand the complexity of class within the black experience. And I value so much those interviews. One, it became the first interview experience that became a part of an exhibit that I was affiliated with. So professionally, that helped me. It helped Palmer Memorial Institute alums feel pride about their institution and more connection to their institution. It helped the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum to promote their site and get more visitors to come to their site to see the exhibit. It helped me to understand, as I said, the complexities of class within the black elite. And And I think on a more emotional and spiritual level, it connected me to my people who had passed away. Now, I want to pause for a moment. There was someone who asked me before if we minded recording, and I have a very strong ethical approach that anytime there's some recording that's being done by people who are participating, that I just ask, because I'm going to be engaging you all soon, and you're going to be speaking up. So, are people okay with this session being recorded? Consensus? Okay, so feel free to record. And I want you all to be conscious of the fact that you're being recorded. Meaning, anything that we say while we're being recorded, while we want to be as authentic and brave and open and vulnerable as possible, also think about the fact that anyone in the world may have access to it at some point because of the World Wide Web, right? So I want us to be both open and brave and vulnerable and thoughtful about the ultimate audiences for the recording. And I'm saying that deliberately because that's exactly what I want you to think about when you're recording your oral histories, that same balance. So think about it for yourself. How would I feel if someone were to share this particular story or this thought with just anyone? That will hopefully inspire empathy when you are interviewing others and sharing their personal and sacred stories with the world. So let me just come back to what I was saying. The reason I wanted to break down some of my journey into this work of oral history is I'm starting to just highlight the purpose and uses for this work and the ways in which you can engage your own journey and the greater world. So in just a minute, I'm going to want to hear from you all. But I do want to say this. The kind of self-awareness and self-disclosure that I'm modeling for you, to me, is at the heart of good community oral history projects. Oral history is personal. There is no way in the world that you are interested in doing these projects just because it's fascinating. I guarantee you that as you do this work, you will come to understand more and more who you are and who you are not. And generally, there's a real heart-level reason or impetus for this work. I think it's extremely important to be curious with yourself, with ourselves, about purpose, inspiration, motivation. Why am I doing this? I encourage all oral historians to keep some sort of journal, whether it is a written journal or an audio journal. Or if you're someone who's visual, you want to do a collage journal, but some way for you to be self-aware. Why do I say that? Number one, I do not believe in objectivity. I do not believe that it's possible to interview someone and be completely objective. We all bring our biases, we all bring our baggage, and we all bring our past. Now, these tools can be, your stuff can actually be used to your benefit if you are aware of it. But when you're not aware of your, all of us have prejudices, all of us have ideologies that shape the way we ask questions, what we're interested in, what we follow up with questions. All of us do. But when we are aware of it, I imagine in my mind that I see these biases that I'm bringing into a conversation. For example, I interview veterans as a part of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. I am a descendant of veterans from 5 different wars, back to the American Civil War. So I have a lot of personal connection to veterans. I'm complicated in the fact that I'm actually fairly really a pacifist, but I have a strong heart for veterans. I think anyone who, by choice or force, puts their body and blood and bones on the line for me, whether I ask them to or not, whether I agree with it or not, that at the minimum I can give them my witness, my ears and my eyes, and my curious heart, right? So when I go into an exchange, it's important for me to set my politics to the side. It's important for me to set maybe even some of my emotion to the side, my tenderheartedness to the side, so that when I hear a story, I can be connected but slightly detached. And so all of this stuff that's mine, it doesn't go away, but I marginalize my stuff so that I can centralize theirs. The only way I can do that is being self-aware. So that's one of the reasons we do the journaling, the reflecting, the thinking to ourselves, why am I doing this? What is this about for me? How is this personal for me? How does this connect to my life? What part of my life journey is connected to this person? Am I trying to heal a wound? You know, for those of you who are documenting people of color and you're not a person of color, is there something in your past around race relations that you're trying to get at, around reconciliation? Are you trying to heal something or connect something from the childhood? You know, was there a black domestic in your life who you saw mistreated and you're somehow still trying to deal with that issue? And I'm just saying, these are examples of things I've heard my students say to me. You know, for me, I had a grandfather who served in Vietnam for 2 tours, and the only exchange that he had with anyone in the family was my grandmother saying to him, "Gus, I thought you said that all of your clothes were clean. These t-shirts are orange." And he said, "They are clean." Because the shirt had been washed in the muddy water in Vietnam. That was the only conversation that Gustav Hamilton Caution, my grandfather, had around his 2 tours of Vietnam. That silence haunts me, and so there's a void I'm trying to fill when I talk to veterans. But I can't allow the hunger for my grandfather's narrative to be the center of a conversation I'm having with an Iraq veteran who has a completely different story and deserves an open space for his story or her story. Does that make sense? And I say this because I bumped my head real hard a couple of times doing oral history work. Once I was trying to find where my great-grandmother was buried, and the last living member of that generation was her sister-in-law, and Aunt Thelma was one of those people who didn't talk with anything other than venom and vinegar. Do you know people like that? You know, just out of their mouth is just fire, right? So I was scared of Aunt Thelma. And she was little and like on a walker and an oxygen tank. But she scared me. And I messed up royally, but it was a good mistake because I learned from it. I asked her every question in the world I could think of about her in-laws, my blood relatives, who she married, she married into that family. But I didn't ask about her. I didn't start with, what is your story? And the resentment, when I look back on that interview, built and built and built and built. And by the end of the interview, she's actually becoming antagonistic with me and defensive and almost incendiary around our family. Like, well, so-and-so thought she was so much, and so-and-so wasn't anything but a drunk, and so-and-so. Do you understand? That's where the interview went. But I planted those seeds because I didn't give her space. So I'm just saying how important it is when we go into interviews to take all of the things that are ours and set them to the side intentionally so that you can honor the gift of the person in front of you. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to honor the gift of the people in front of me right now. And what I'd like you to do is to just say your name, where you're from, and one oral history project you have in mind that you're thinking about doing. I'm going to say it because oral historians tend to sometimes struggle with rules. So I'm going to say it again. Your name, where you're from, and one oral history project that you're thinking about doing. Okay. Yes.
Nicola Carriage from Brevard, North Carolina. And the group that I'm with has a reunion coming up next month. So part of what I'm doing is the interview. And I kind of want to hear some prayers from the old to maybe a younger generation.
Okay, so Nicola, you're from Brevard, North Carolina, and you're going to a family reunion and you want to document some...
Rosenwald.
Okay, the Rosenwald reunion. Okay, thank you.
I'm Sybil Argentar. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. I work with a group of folks in Black Mountain, which is close to Asheville. It's the Thomas Chapel A&E Zion Church. I'm on the board with them, and I would love to do an oral history project with them, interviewing some of the older members of the church.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Helen Rosewood Saunders from Seneca, South Carolina, and I want to interview some of the alums of Retreat Rosenwald School that get on that.
Some of the Retreat Rosenwald School. Thank you.
My name is Megan Brown. I'm from Nashville, North Carolina. But the school that we're working with is in Castaic, North Carolina. We're trying to finish that Rosenwald School so that that generation in the community place things that they'll be able to know the struggle that the people, their aunts and uncles, even their parents attended this school, what they had to go through. We're trying to bring it up to the now generation so that they'll be able to go in, and we're trying to put different classes in there, computer class.
Okay.
And go through G.
And this is the Rosenwald School in Nashville.
And Castaic.
Castaic. And I'll be seeing with y'all tomorrow with the tour, the African American Music Trail Tour. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Good morning. I'm Marvin Jones
Hi,
from
Marvin.
Hertford County, northeastern North Carolina. I've been interviewing on audio and video elders in my mixed-race landowning community, and I'm now focusing on the graduate students of my church's Rosenwald School with the purpose of doing a film on the church and the school.
Okay. Your church. Okay. And I'm gonna, oh, wait, let me not mix you over there. Okay.
I'm Jessica Dockery. I live in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and I don't actually have a project in mind for myself, but I help people with National Register nominations, and I was hoping that I learned some stuff to help them guide people who were writing those nominations.
Okay.
That needed some help.
Great. Thank you. Yes, sir. I'm gonna come up here.
I am Bill Laslett. I am from Richmond, Virginia. I'm an architect working with an alumni group in Clinton, North Carolina. We have a Rosenwald School there that we want to restore, and our first focus in terms of oral histories is with the immediate neighborhood.
Okay.
And that's our next project.
Great. Thank you for being here.
My name is Wanda Place. I'm from Casita, Georgia, which is just south of Columbus. I'm the secretary of the Historic Society there, and in filling out the National Register application thing, I've participated in interviewing some of the graduates from the school, Rosenwald School, and I thoroughly enjoyed meeting them. They had fascinating stories, what little bit we asked in relation to the school. And I would like to do an oral history project to go back to those people and some of the others and get their stories and maybe put copies in the libraries.
Okay, wonderful. Yes.
I'm Darrell Hinton. I'm Mayor Pro Tem of the town of St. George, South Carolina. We just applied to Rosenwald School, and so we'll be interviewing a lot of the alumni of the Rosenwald. We still can get the history of people who actually went there, so we can pass it on to other generations.
Wonderful. Yes.
Hi, I'm Alexandria Drake. Originally from DeKalb, Mississippi, but I'm in school at the University of Texas in graduate school. And for my dissertation, I'd like to bring to conversation retired teachers in segregated schools and current African American teachers in resegregated schools in Mississippi, and sort of catch the oral history from the veteran teachers and see how their classroom operations can sort of help us in predominantly Black schools, rural schools today.
Really important. Thank you. Next one.
Louisiana, Robbie King from Blunt Creek, North Carolina. We're working on oral history with the alumni of the Ware Creek Rosenwald School here in North Carolina, in Goodwin County.
Which county?
Over.
Okay. Yes.
I am Ann Willis. I'm from Madison, North Carolina, which is in Rockingham County. And not only are we working on oral history for the Rosenwald School, I'm a graduate of Laurinburg Institute.
Yes.
Which is the only Black-owned boarding school in North Carolina.
That's right.
And ultimately would like to do an oral history on our graduates.
Yeah, so I hope what I was sharing about Palmer was useful. Okay. Because Laurinburg and Palmer are definitely sisters, and there are several others like Mary Potter in Oxford. Just heard about Cottrell. There was Henderson Institute. Yes. And I just heard about one in Duplin County as well.
C.S. Brown.
C.S. Brown, thank you. Yes. That's right. But that was also a boarding school before it was a Rosenwald school.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Etta Williams Lennon. I'm originally from Clinton, North Carolina, and that's where the Saxon County Training School is, and Mr. Lasley is working with us.
Okay.
On our Rosenwald School. I live in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
And I went to UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay, so we have a lot of connection. Yes.
But yes, we'd like to, as Mr. Lasley said, we'd like to introduce the residents and neighbors that live around the school to try to figure out, ask them what they see as a need in the community. So whenever we start the programming for the school, we'll know what kind of programs.
Okay.
And we'd also like to interview the alumni of the Saxon County Training School, get an oral history
Of them.
for the school.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Maggie Williams, Ellis Love, and I'm from Clinton, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I would like any kind of history pertaining to our old self-training school.
Okay.
County training school.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Virginia Robinson. I live in Chapel Hill, but my mother's town is from Curtisburg County, where my brother lives. And our project is to interview the students of the Coin Drop Rosenwald School, which is the only Rosenwald school in Curtisburg County.
Okay.
It's not true.
She's wrong.
Oh,
Okay. Wait. This is the sibling. Okay. And what is your name?
My name is Paul Robinson.
And there is another.
Yeah, there were actually three at one point. There was
Okay.
one in Modiac, one in Stone area, and then also the Coin Drop Rosenwald School.
Okay.
Coin Drop was the largest one.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. We ended up purchasing it, and we're going to end up trying to rehabilitate it.
Okay. And tell the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to put it together.
Got you. One of the things I want to recognize is I love the diversity in this room. Because, one of the things I've learned is the story of Rosenwald schools and other African American historical treasures, even though they've come out of a distinct community, they touch all of us. across racial lines. So I love that all of us are leaning in across generations and across ethnicities to do this work, because that's how we get it done. So I just want to honor how diverse this room is, and I really appreciate that. I think that's so important to do the work for us to all celebrate together. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what we're going to do next. So this involves you. You're going to experience a deep listening. Now, I will want to tell you all, the purpose of this training, as much as maybe you all want to fast forward to actually digging into the Rosenwald stuff, which is what the whole conference is about, the purpose of this training is to give you some skills and some resources and some knowledge around how to do oral history work. You will be able to apply it to Rosenwald schools, but you will also be able to apply it to other projects. So hopefully you'll get the bug and think about how to do this work with Rosenwald schools, with your local churches, your family. So what happens when we hear a narrative is, even if it's our own, is that our cognitive glass, the brain, gets quite fuller than it was before we heard the story. So it's important to have strategies to empty the glass so that you can make yourself ready for the next story, or guess what, your life outside of oral history work, right? And so deep breath, closing your eyes, journaling, audio journaling, talking about it with another colleague or a friend. It's important to find ways to empty that glass. Now, I wanted to share with you what I observed, and then I want to hear your comments about the experience, both listening and speaking. I saw smiling. I saw concentration and focus. I saw a lot of people really working hard to maintain silence. I saw some note-taking. I saw some head nodding and some leaning in. I may be mistaken, but did I see maybe some tears somewhere? Okay. So it's amazing how quickly in a 10-minute exchange we can get to the heart of something. Why do you think I had you do that? What do you think the purpose of that exercise was? To know how it feels on the other side. The discomfort of being put on the spot, the discomfort of having someone's gaze on you, the vulnerability of editing in your head, what part of this story am I going to share and what parts am I going to leave out? Feeling like I need to sound eloquent and intelligent, right? Those insecurities that pop up. It's important for us to have empathy for the people we interview. The empathy that you feel now for what it feels like to be interviewed, even in 10 minutes, will help you to have more patience and gentleness and humility when you do an interview yourself. Because sometimes we get so nervous as oral historians. Sometimes we get so urgent. Oh my gosh, what if you die and I don't get the story? People think that. What if this person dies and I don't get that story? Well, if you go into your interview with that kind of urgency, people can kind of smell that and feel it on you, and it will make them feel even more nervous. Is that understandable? So when you have empathy for what it feels like to be on the other side, it will, I think, calm you down a little bit because you want them to feel comfortable. That is probably one of the most important things about an oral history interview, is making them feel comfortable. Where are you being interviewed? Maybe even what they have on, what kind of technology you're using. Do they have water? Is the climate comfortable for them? Are you asking questions that you vetted with them beforehand? Comfort is really important, okay? So, I'd love to hear from you all what that was like. Yes?
Well, first I have to say that it's just a blessing that we were both fours, because Helen's best friend was married to my cousin.
And you didn't know that?
And we did not know that.
So, new connection. And you know, I wanted.
She was from Seneca.
Right.
I felt that first. Got hit me.
And then it just, and then it hit, there are no mistakes.
And then I was like, oh
right.
my God.
So that's going to happen. You're going to interview people, and you're going to find these connections, and you're going to go, whoa, right? And it feels like, oh, there's something bigger at work here. What else happened for people? And I want to hear a little bit about what it felt like to interview and to be interviewed. And you're going to say, maybe, I didn't really interview. I asked one question, and then I sat there and I was quiet. Being quiet and nodding and being present and listening and writing follow-up questions is 99.9% of what it means to do an interview. The other 0.1% is the research and the other questions. Does that make sense? Your sensibility and the way in which you engage with someone is the most important part of an interview. What did it feel like? Yeah.
I think both Daryl and I were surprised. I think each of us at about the 7-minute mark kind of ran out. And you ask somebody what brings you joy, and you just think, I'm going to talk forever because, well, hopefully you think you're a joyful person, you know. And then we just got to about 7 minutes, and we were like, how am I out of stuff? And to not have the person there to sort of save you with a follow-up question left a really interesting sort of space.
Mm-hmm. So when you all had the quiet moments, those of you who were the interviewers, did you feel like you wanted to say something and you wanted to jump in and you wanted to ask questions, and was it hard? So what did you do to keep yourself back? Like, whoa, Nellie, how did you do that? Yes.
I thought about you yelling at
You thought you were yelling at me?
I hope she doesn't yell at me.
That's right. You sound like my daughter. I promise I'm trying not to yell at y'all. So, yes, think about me yelling at you. No, I'm just kidding. But it is a practice of restraint. So I overheard you have a football background, so you understand the coaching. So if having a coach in your head is what keeps you on point for...
It was your presence.
Yeah. So, but you need to have your own, like, I will have restraint here. Restraint. Yeah.
I was trying to write down questions to follow up with, but I found if I waited just a few more seconds, she can answer that question.
Yeah.
When I try a new question,
Right.
I get that answer. So I wanted to ask questions, but it didn't take more than 10 seconds before everything was answered before me. So I just sat here and listened to a wonderful story.
So there's something about releasing control. When we're asked to be silent, we can see that, you know what? We don't have to be in charge of the interview. We can be a facilitator of creating the space for the story to unfold. But if we offer silence, so what I try to do is I count, when I am doing follow-up questions, I try to count in my head to about 5. And I'll just sit there and hold the silence. And most of the time, they go, and you know another thing, and I just let it flow. My ideal interview is I ask a couple of questions, and I just let them go. That's the sweet spot. But follow-up questions are important too, and that was why. So crossing, I don't know if Jessica, if you had the practice of crossing off when she would answer one, but that's a good practice. So if you have follow-up questions and they automatically, organically answer one, cross them off. Okay. How did it feel to be heard and for someone to hear your story? Yes.
It sort of opened up to me, I think, some things that were important to me. Because my question from Alethea was, what brings me joy? And I had this, it was the same thing. I sort of hit a wall for a bit, and I thought, wait a minute, there's all these things too. And it was nice to share that with someone that I just met.
What was nice about it?
It felt like it helped us connect, because Alethea would kind of nod when I was saying things, like she maybe felt the same way, even though she wasn't really talking back to you, but by her face and her nods and things, I could see that connection happening, and that was important to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you look happy.
Yeah.
So we can actually bring people joy in communities. That's the kind of reciprocity that we can give as oral historians. Think about some elders who might be isolated and may not see the value of their worth in their community or their stories. And some elders, you're going to have to convince that their story is worthy of being heard. There's some people in this room who probably need to be recorded, and you're going, well, no, I need to record everybody else, but you actually have really powerful stories too. Okay? So you can bring joy to someone, and you can connect to someone. Yes.
What is the best way to record?
So I'm going to close with a few of those tips around technology. I deliberately don't lead with technology because technology is a rabbit hole. And what I find is technology changes every 5 minutes, but what doesn't change about doing this work are the methods of compassion, humility, integrity, and strong ethics, and understanding the power of silence and connect. So if we have that, then we can add any technology we want to that basis. So that's why I always start there. So I want to lead you all. And does anyone have any burning desire to say something about that experience before I'm going to walk you to through the technology and some other tips to close us out? But any burning desire to talk about what just happened? Yes. One second. I'm going to come here and then here. One second. Okay.
I was going to say just how precious it is to listen to other people's stories. I feel like you know.
Could you speak up? Maybe stand so that those in the back can hear.
I was going to say how precious it is to gather or to hear other people's stories. Now I feel like, not that I know your father, this is who we talked about, the person that's significant to us, but just to hear those stories, I think it's better than any gift that you could receive. Mm-hmm. Now I'm walking away feeling like I know something about Nicola. So
you know a person you didn't know before, and how there's like a sacredness to that, and you feel a deep responsibility to that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
For me, it was a good experience, like for Mr. Knight.
Okay.
I was able to I chose what brings me joy, a passion, and he chose a significant persons in life. I was able to more or less kind of go into mine, the things I discussed, wherein he said there wasn't something that he really does all the time, but then once he got to talking, he was able to share significant people and persons in his life.
Good.
So that was where by me being a social worker for 26 years, and that's what I did. A lot of times with my work, I was able to just begin to talk about myself, but I found out with him that I had once I got started with my openness and my friendliness, and he began to relate back to me.
So building trust is important.
Yes.
The way we connect with people in terms of go by and say hello. I just want to, get to know you. Tell them about the project. But building trust is important. I am going to go ahead and walk you through these tips that I came up with that you get to take away with you. I do want to recommend a few resources that are not here. So if you want to write them down in terms of websites and organizations that might be useful. The Southern Oral History Program. Southern Oral History Program. It's not here. I'm telling you so you can write it down. The things that I'm telling you slowly is because it's not on this card. Southern Oral History Program. And if your neighbor didn't get it, share with your neighbor. SOHP, it is a program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You can look it up. And they have wonderful resources. They have interviews, the Southern Oral History Program. They have great examples. And then also, if you are someone who's into technology, which you do not have to be to do this work, there is a company called B&W. I'm sorry, B&H. Am I saying that right? Right, B&H. B&H. That's what they're called. B&H. The letter B, the word and the letter H. You can look them up on the internet, and you'll see their 1-800 number. These people are very patient, kind. They are not here to, rip you off. You can call them and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to audio record someone. This is my budget. Can you recommend something for an amateur who's just getting started? They will spend time with you on that phone, and they will help you get matched to the technology that makes sense for what you are trying to do. They have excellent customer service. Okay? And so each of you is going to be working. Some of you might want to do videography like Brian's doing in the back. Some of you may want to do audio. I like to do audio. I've used a Marantz. I've used a Tascam recorder. I've used Android phone. I've used the iPhone. So there's all different ways. You can use a cassette player. So to answer your question, what's best, it depends on your budget, what medium you want to work with, and what kind of project you want to do, and the technology will change. And so that's why I say B and H is really good, because you can think, what do I want to do? And how much money do I have to spend? And you can call these folks and they will really talk you through it. I like audio and the combination of audio and still photographs for my projects. It's just a preference. Some people like video. Some of my interviewees are sensitive to video. They get nervous being on video, but they feel a little less nervous having a still photograph and an audio recording, okay? This is a great opportunity to connect with your young people in your family and say, I'm gonna give you $100 to help grandma record this on your smartphone and email it to me, okay? Because you would pay them much less than you would a professional person, and you get to spend time with your grandchild and they get to hear stories that they would never have heard. That'd be a great investment of $100. So you're gonna earn this $100. We're gonna go figure out how to do this. Go get, or your niece, nephew, godchild, neighbor's child. These kids know how to do stuff from the time they're 2. So go find a child, because they'll know how to do it. Okay, here are my other tips. 1, get permission. Release forms are really important when you do interviews. You may want to deposit those interviews in a local archive. You might want to create a local archive at your Rosenwald School. Your Durham County Library, we work with them to, we have a collection at the History Hub. Your county librarians can be your friends, so we'll get to that in a second. But think long term. If you want to write a book, if you want to create a film, if you want to do a mural project, you want to have release forms that someone said, I give you permission. But here's something I'm going to share with you that's useful. Even, let's say you forget to do the written permission, which I do not recommend. Written permission or not, please say on record, do I have your permission to record this interview? So before I start an interview, I say an announcement. This is Michelle Lanier. I'm interviewing Margaret Brown. Today's date is Friday, June 19th, 2015. We're in Durham, North Carolina. Do I have your permission to record this interview about Rosenwald Schools? So just some basic information, an introduction, and a verbal permission. Get permission. Clarity of purpose. Make sure you're clear. What is it you're trying to accomplish? And make sure you express that to the people you're interviewing. Even if you have a little handout that you print out at your library or home that just says, this is what I'm trying to do. Put your contact information on there. Have some information about it. So if they want to say, well, let me think about it, then you have it. Now, trust building. The people who trust you pretty immediately, who say, hey, yeah, I'd like to do that. That sounds fun. Ask them who to interview next and let them make the introduction. Try not to walk around cold. Hey, I want to do this, because people, who are you? Try to get an introduction from a friend of a friend to these people. Okay, research and guidance. Partner with your local institutions, libraries, churches, civic organizations, sororities, fraternities, Masonic organization, alumni groups, of course, universities, historical societies. All of these organizations think about keeping their history, and some of them actually do have climate-controlled archival places that will keep those oral histories safe over time. So think about archiving. Where would the appropriate place be to deposit them? Yes?
I'm thinking about whether professionally archiving or whether we do it on site.
I would recommend both.
Okay.
I recommend both. I believe in keeping oral histories in the communities of their origin. It's important for people in the community to be able to get to them. So I think having it on site is important. And in case of disaster, I think having it at your county library is important. Have them have a copy. And then having a state library archive would also be a good idea as well. Let's see. And then these people are also good resources for saying, I'm trying to get some information about this school or this situation or this event so that I can ask quality questions. They can help lead you. You always want to do research. I tell my students, come in with 20 questions. You may or may not get through 2, but have 20 as your insurance so that if you get to those awkward moments of silence after the requisite counting to 5, you have your questions and you're writing your follow-up questions. Follow-up questions to me are always richer, but you never know what they're going to be till you hear stories. Okay, but your 20 that's your insurance, right? But those questions need to come from a pre-interview conversation. Oh, I have a few questions about that after just chatting with you. Don't worry about losing the story because you got into it when you talked about it a little bit. Oh, I wish I had my recorder. It's okay. Don't be urgent, remember? We're not being fearful. We're being calm. So we're going to go in, ask some questions, get some research based on some basic information. We talked about archiving. Number 5, you all learned this. Silence is golden. Silence, what does it say? It allows interviewees to gather their thoughts, formulate responses, and give them ample time to do so, right? Okay, 6, technology is a tool, not an enemy. I talked a little bit about that. It changes constantly. Some people still use cassette tape. We know that cassette tape in a climate-controlled environment can last 100 years. But in this new digital world, archives are backing things up on all of these different hard drives that are really sophisticated. So the digital world is real. It's happening. And so that's why I do recommend B&H. And again, I use a Tascam for my audio recording. Tascam, Tascam. And it has a built-in mic that's really powerful, and it's very affordable. You can find some of these on Amazon. But I start with B&H to get the advice. You might purchase from them, and that would be nice to buy something after all the advice. But you can also find things on Amazon. The power of thank you. Someone mentioned here that the story is precious, like you know something about this woman's father, and that's sacred. And you know, how can you? I'm 3 minutes over. I'm wrapping up. How can you possibly thank someone for something so precious? Bare minimum, a thank you note, a copy of the interview that they can actually use. So if they don't have a computer to open up an MP3, that's not the format you need to share it with them, on. So think about a CD, a tape, maybe if you do a transcription, which is a lot of time, it is, but if you do that, share that with the person. If you transcribe some of the quotes, but not all of them, share that. Think about providing some copies to the family. Go by check on them from time to time. You're not in a marriage with the person once you interview them, so you don't have to feel like you're committed to them for the rest of your life, but it's nice to stay connected if you can. And 8, keep an open mind. So if you have a story that you're documenting, really try to make it what I call multivocal or polyvocal. There are multiple perspectives to any story, to any place. Try to get at least 3 or 4 perspectives on a school or an event or history. And if you're looking at a school, look at cross time periods. If we have a very, older one, get a younger one. You have male, get female. Balance. Be open-minded also about what you do with these stories. You could do a youth program. You could do a health initiative based on the fact that the oral histories revealed, a strong cancer issue in that community. You could take it to your legislature to tell them that you have some needs that you have in your community. You could do a mural, as I said before, of here are some historic figures that we want to tell their stories of and have their quotes. You could have people write songs or plays about these stories. So there's so many outcomes that you can do with those narratives.